Well, the White House says it has not given up after cases against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James were thrown out.
A federal judge dismissed the Trump administration's cases against them yesterday, saying that the prosecutor who brought them, Lindsay Halligan, was unlawfully appointed. James faced charges of bank fraud and making false statements to a financial institution, while Comey had been charged with obstruction of Congress and making false statements during a Senate hearing back in 2020.
But the Department of Justice will be appealing very soon, and it is our position that Lindsay Halligan is extremely qualified for this position, but more importantly, was legally appointed to it.
For Comey, it could be the end of his case since the statute of limitations for his charges have passed, but an appeal for James could continue her legal battle. Joining us now is constitutional law expert Robert McWhirter. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Morning.
You know, the minute this happened, you heard Attorney General Pam Bondi come out saying there's going to be an immediate appeal. So what are the chances that that will actually take place?
Oh, I think it's very likely there will be an appeal, but I don't think it's going to win. Look, on this question, I always say you got to start with the owner's manual, which is the United States Constitution, about what's going on here. And in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, it says that the president may appoint officials like U.S. attorneys with the advice and consent of the Senate. So what's gone on here is that the president put in his political appointee to do something that no other career prosecutor in office would do, which is file these charges. And now this is turning around and not being very successful. And this has nothing to do with the problems they have with actually the case. But they put somebody in who's just not been appointed by the Senate. And that power exists for a reason. It's a check on the power of the presidency to keep from just putting his political appointees to use the Department of Justice for his political whims.
Yeah, and I appreciate your show and tell this morning and kind of explain, why this is going on. But, right, yeah, this is considered a major win, though, for Comey and James. But even James himself is concerned. He could be indicted again, but of course that would be tough because of statute of limitations. Explain a little bit about what the options are now that both of these cases have been dismissed.
Well, the only option they have with James Comey is actually to go forward with the appeal because the statute of limitations has run. And so they will appeal it. I read the judge's order dismissing the case. I thought it was a very sound, well-written order based on, not only the Constitution itself, but also statutes and the Supreme Court cases on the issue. So that's the end of the line. If they lose this appeal, there's no more going after James Comey. Now, Letitia James, on the other hand, it is not within the statute of limitations, so they could actually refile with a U.S. attorney who's correctly appointed. Now, the trouble they're having there, and this is why they brought in this other woman anyway, is because there's not probable cause, and the career prosecutors in the office and the better lawyers in the office won't touch this because their bar license will be on the line someday if they file a case without probable cause or likelihood of conviction.
Can we talk about what the precedent is or what exists for courts throwing out prosecutions due to improper appointments? It looks like it's happened a few times in the past.
Yeah, but it's pretty rare stuff. I mean, this is an extraordinary situation, and it should be looked at that. And again, the purpose of this is to make sure that you have people who are bound to the Constitution. When a person becomes a U.S. attorney, their advice and consent of the Senate, so they have Senate approval, and they raise their hand and they take an oath to the Constitution. They don't take an oath to the president, the presidency, and they certainly don't take an oath to Donald Trump. And you can't leave aside here what started this, which was Donald Trump's post on Truth Social directing his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to go after his political enemies and people he has a grudge with. And I'm sorry, the Constitution just doesn't allow that, nor does any good lawyering or ethic rules that apply to lawyers and prosecutors.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about what this means for Halligan and other actions that she has taken. Does that mean that these are all void now?
Yes, they are, and everything she's done. What it means for her is I would be, if I was her, very worried about her bar license, because when this thing plays out, she is going to have a very serious bar complaint against her. There's an ethical rule. The model rules are ER 3.8, which says that a prosecutor will not bring a case without probable cause. And then the Department of Justice has further rules without a likelihood of prosecution and success in prosecution. And that is precisely what she's done. And by the way, you can make an analogy to the Nixon administration and what they tried to do. But if you recall, in the Nixon administration, they had to figure out what the president's motive were by chasing after the tapes, and we had a big fight about whether the tapes belonged to the public, and the famous Watergate tapes. Well, here you don't need tapes. You have Donald Trump's Truth Social posts saying exactly what the motivation was, and he said, I want you to go after my political enemies, Pam. And Pam did it, and she put Lindsey in to do this, and it's just not going to go well for Attorney General Bondi or this Assistant U.S. Attorney who was improperly appointed.
Well, it is fascinating to watch, I'm sure, as a constitutional lawyer, even more so. So thank you so much for being with us this morning. We appreciate it.
My great pleasure.